If you're on a spiritual path, you've probably heard terms like non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, and Brahman thrown around. Maybe you have some idea of what they mean. But the question is, what do they mean precisely? In this video, I'm going to walk you through what these terms actually mean and how they're related. But more than that, I want to show you how these core concepts from Hinduism can completely change the way you see reality. Now, these are complex ideas, so I'll be doing a bit of back and forth between those concepts as we connect the dots. Let's start with Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta is one of the most influential schools of Hinduism. I'll get into what that school teaches and how it developed, but before that, we need to talk about its most important idea. The central claim of Advaita Vedanta is this: everything you experience, your thoughts, your body, the world around you, time, space, all of it is part of a single undivided reality. There are not two things. There is only one thing. That's what non-dualism means, is the belief that you and I are not separate. You and I are exactly one. And not just that, we're also one with the trees, the air, the chairs we're sitting on. Any idea we have that we're not something, say, I'm not a cockroach, is false. I am exactly one with all the cockroaches of this planet. Ew. But yes, everything you see around you is you. Of course, we don't perceive things that way. We think we're very much not cockroaches, so much so that we step on them. Well, not me, my husband steps on them, I scream, and I refuse to go into the room until they're dead and out of sight. But that certainty we have, that we are so apart from other things that we can even kill them, is false. We're under the illusion of separation. It's a veil of deceit that clouds our perception so that we don't experience reality as it actually is. I want to make this really clear. According to Advaita Vedanta, you're not just connected to everything, you are everything. It's not just that you and I are part of some greater whole, like drops of water in an ocean. No, there is only one thing, one undivided reality. There's no real difference between me, you, a tree, or a cockroach, except how we perceive things. We perceive ourselves to be different, but we are literally the same thing. Perception is the problem. Perception is the illusion. So this is the core idea in Advaita Vedanta. And I know when I put it like that, it sounds like total madness. But stay with me because this idea is brilliant and it might just be true. So hang on and let's look at all the pieces and what they imply. Now, you might have heard the word Brahman before. Brahman is the name Advaita Vedanta gives to that one undivided reality. The universal consciousness, the one undivided thing that actually exists, that is the Brahman. The best way I know to describe it is this: Brahman is everything that exists, but also everything that can be conceived. That means everything you see around you is the Brahman. But here's the key. Since Brahman is the only real thing, and everything that exists is in the Brahman, then everything you know to exist is real. So, take the chair you're sitting on. You know it exists. The chair is Brahman, and therefore the chair is real. It goes like this. If something exists, it is Brahman. Brahman is real. Therefore, everything that exists is real. So, all the things you see around you, your desk, your phone, your cat, they're real. But it's not just things you see, it also includes the things you know exist but don't directly perceive. So you don't see infrared light or X-rays, but you know they exist, so they're real. But watch what happens next, because this is where things go off the rails. Remember, Brahman is everything that exists and everything that can be conceived. This is where we're not in Kansas anymore. This is the Pandora's box. Once it opens, reality gets wild. Here's the idea. If you can conceive it, then it's Brahman. And if it's Brahman, then it's real. Whatever you can conceive exists in any way that you can define existence. Now, sure, there's one small caveat. You have to define existence in a way that includes things you can't perceive. But you already do. You already believe infrared light and X-rays exist. You believe germs and subatomic particles exist, even though you've never seen them with your own eyes. So your definition of reality already includes a lot of things you can't perceive. But that means this: if everything you can conceive is Brahman, and Brahman is the only real thing, then everything you can conceive is real. So, not just Earth and planets and stars and galaxies. No, a flying teapot in space? Real. Can you imagine it? Then it exists. Can you imagine a planet where gravity pulls up instead of down? That planet exists. Can you imagine werewolves, dragons, fairies, vampires, Sasquatch, and aliens? Those are real. And it gets even more fun. It's not just about what you can imagine, it's about what any being that exists can imagine. So aliens are real because you can imagine them, but they get a vote. Everything they imagine is also real. What can an alien imagine? I have no idea. But this means that reality is very strange indeed. Many things you cannot imagine are real. And this raises an even bigger question. If anything that can be conceived is real, then what about spirits, angels, and gods? What about the God? Does God exist? And if God exists, then what is it? That's way too big to tackle in this video. But if you're curious, let me know in the comments, because the implications here are vast. Now, some of you may be stuck on something I said earlier. I said that Brahman is everything that can be conceived. But what about the things that cannot be conceived? There is something strange with the notion of what can be conceived is Brahman, because we can immediately think of its dual counterpart, what cannot be conceived. At least in terms of semantics, the idea that everything that can be conceived is Brahman gives rise to the idea that perhaps something exists that cannot be conceived. Here we get into the limits of words, because we do understand what is something that can be conceived. If you can imagine it, then you've conceived it. That means it's Brahman and is therefore real. We can even understand the nature of something that we cannot conceive ourselves, but that can be conceived by someone else. These are the things that you cannot imagine, but someone else can. That is still Brahman and is real. But what is something that nobody can conceive? Not you, not me, not aliens, not gods, not anyone. If it can't be conceived at all, is it even a thing? You see, this gets into the limit of the meaning of words, and the whole thing becomes rather circular. And this problem, the impossibility of grasping what cannot be conceived, isn't new. This has been a central question in philosophy for thousands of years. Actually, the great Advaita Vedanta philosopher Shankara argued that Brahman is beyond all thought and speech, that any attempt to define the Brahman is already a mistake, so technically I'm already wrong here. And Madhyamaka Buddhism, especially Nagarjuna, built an entire system around deconstructing the limitations of concepts. In the West, thinkers like Kant and mystical traditions like Neoplatonism, Sufism, and Kabbalah all came to similar conclusions. There is a limit to what the mind can ever grasp. So, when we start talking about what cannot be conceived, we're stepping into a kind of philosophical black hole. You can look into it if you want, but I'm going to respectfully bow out of that part of the discussion for this video at least. The good news is we don't need to resolve that question to have all the cool conversations we're going to have in this channel. We can still talk about the nature of reality, about the spiritual path, about Tantra, esotericism, magic, any of that, without needing to settle whether what cannot be conceived is the Brahman. So instead, I'll just focus on the already pretty wild idea that everything that can be conceived is the Brahman, not a part of it, the whole of it. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, where does this idea even come from? Why would anyone believe that everything is one? The belief in non-duality doesn't come from abstract theory. It comes from direct observation. Advaita Vedanta isn't based on revelation the way many other traditions are, like Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, which are built on divine revelation, where truth is received through scripture or through prophecy. Advaita Vedanta is supposedly built on realization through experience. The sages and philosophers who developed it didn't just think about non-duality, and they didn't receive a divine message about it, they experienced it. They say that if you peel away the layers of illusion that stop you from seeing who you really are, You would directly experience the unity of reality, and it would be so obvious that you wouldn't be able to deny it. But of course, can we trust this? Can we believe that these sages actually saw reality as it is, or were they mistaken? Well, there are three possibilities. The first is that the sages are either lying or deceiving themselves. Maybe they didn't experience what they thought they experienced. Like maybe it is the equivalent of seeing a strange light in the sky and thinking it is a UFO, when in reality it was just a drone. So maybe those who claim self-realization are simply wrong. Maybe they believe they saw the truth, but they're caught in some kind of illusion. But that brings us to an important question. Are all experiences equally unreliable? Is a momentary illusion the same as a systematically cultivated realization? We should question human perception, absolutely. People can be deceived, we know this. But not all experiences are equal. Seeing a weird light in the sky is not the same thing as spending years training your mind, stripping away illusion, and arriving at the same direct realization that many others have arrived before you. This isn't just a one-off hallucination from a supposed messiah. Is a highly reproducible, well-documented state of awareness that people across history, across culture, and across traditions have described. So, if this were just a cognitive glitch, why does it keep happening under specific, structured, intentional practice, often using precise techniques that have been refined over millennia? At some point, we have to ask how much skepticism is reasonable before we acknowledge that we're looking at a pattern. And this pattern is not exclusive to Advaita Vedanta. The recognition of non-duality shows up in many other traditions, each with their own methods. In Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen and Mahamudra, this state of awareness is called Rigpa. In Zen, it's called Kensho. In Kashmiri Shaivism, it's known as Shiva consciousness. In Sufi mysticism, it's Fana. These are different names for what seems to be the same fundamental insight that ego can dissolve into the divine. And each of these systems has its own specific tools: meditation, breath control, self-inquiry, mantra, visualization, all designed to help you directly realize non-duality. Beyond formal spiritual traditions, non-duality has also been encountered through altered states of consciousness, which can happen during intense ritual practices, in psychedelic experiences with things like psilocybin, DMT, or LSD, or even through spontaneous awakenings. There's a lot of variation in how people get there, but the core realization is consistent. The sense of being separate dissolves, and what's revealed is the undeniable unity at the foundation of existence. So that brings us to the second possibility, that Advaita Vedanta's claim is actually right, that the sages and everyone who had a non-dual experience are describing something real, and their interpretation of that experience is correct. Now, just to be precise here, I said their interpretation is correct, and that's an important detail, because both Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism are grounded in direct experience, but they don't interpret the experience of realization in the same way. Now, both traditions are non-dual. They are not debating the idea that all reality is one and we are not separate. They both agree on that, but they differ when it comes to the exact nature of consciousness. Now, I'll come back to that in another video because it's fascinating. And those differences matter a lot when it comes to esoteric practices. But for now, just know that across traditions, no one who has experienced self-realization, whether they call it enlightenment, samadhi, moksha, crossing the abyss, or union with the divine, none of them deny the core insight that we and all things are one. There is a third possibility, though. Some people suggest that those who experience non-duality are tapping into a different level of reality, one where non-duality is true, while the rest of us remain in another reality where it is not. You sometimes hear people say, everyone has their own reality, as a way to reconcile things. You have your truth, I have my truth, as if both views could be right. But this is not really possible, because non-duality as a claim is not compatible with the idea of multiple realities. The whole premise is that there is only one reality, Brahman, and all perceived separation is an illusion. So if there were another reality where non-duality didn't apply, that would already prove non-duality false. false. You can't have it both ways. Either there is only one reality and non-duality is true for everyone, or there are multiple realities and non-duality is false. You can't say that non-duality is true for you, but not for someone else. If it is only true for some, then it is not non-duality. That's literally what the idea of non-duality rules out. There's no clever escape here. Either non-duality is right or it is wrong. So, to recap what we discussed so far, Advaita Vedanta is a school of Hindu thought that says Brahman is the only reality. There is no second thing. Everything that exists or can be conceived is Brahman. What we perceive as separateness between ourselves and others, between us and anything at all, is an illusion. That illusion is called Maya, and I'll talk more about that in another video. And liberation, what they call moksha, is simply seeing through the illusion. It's not about becoming Brahman, it's about realizing that we've never been anything else. Okay, now let's go over Advaita Vedanta itself for a bit. The word Advaita means not true, literally non-dual. And Vedanta means the conclusion of the Vedas. So Advaita Vedanta is the non-dual conclusion of the Vedas. The Vedas are the oldest scripture of Hinduism and among the oldest religious scriptures in the world. They were composed in Sanskrit and passed down orally for a long time before they were ever written down. Advaita Vedanta is based primarily on the Upanishads, which started to emerge over 2,500 years ago or more. The Upanishads form the philosophical core of the Vedas, and they're full of teachings about non-duality and the nature of Brahman. But Advaita Vedanta is also shaped by two other key texts, the Bhagavad Gita, which was written somewhere between 2,000 and 2,300 years ago, and is probably the most famous Hindu text in the West. The Gita explores the practical challenges and moral choices faced by anyone on the path to self-realization. And then there is the Brahma Sutras, written around the same time as the Gita or a bit later. These sutras organized and clarified the teachings of the Upanishads into a full systematic philosophy. These three texts together, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras, are known as the Prasthana Traya, or the threefold foundation of Vedanta. But it was Adi Shankaracharya who turned Advaita Vedanta into a structured school of thought in the 8th century. Advaita Vedanta already existed as one way to interpret the Vedas, but Shankara's commentaries on the Upanishads, the Gita, and the Brahma Sutras gave it a solid philosophical framework. He unified its core ideas into a coherent doctrine. Shankara himself was a fascinating person. The legend says that he mastered the Vedas by the time he was 8 years old and reached enlightenment at 10. During his short life, he traveled all across India, debating other philosophers, and winning, against scholars in Mimamsa, Samkhya, Buddhism, and other Vedantic schools. He also founded 4 monastic centers to preserve Advaita Vedanta, and they still exist today. It was Shankara who argued that Brahman alone is real, and that the world of appearances is Maya, an illusion. He taught that the perception of separateness is caused by ignorance, called avidya, and that liberation, called moksha, doesn't come through rituals or devotion to the gods, but through knowledge, called jnana. Shankara was incredibly successful. By the time he died, at just 32 years old, he had transformed Hindu philosophy, and his interpretation of Vedanta became the dominant non-dual tradition. You may have heard of Swami Vivekananda. He was an Advaita Vedanta monk who played a major role in bringing Indian spirituality to the West. He gave a now famous speech at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893, where he introduced Advaita Vedanta to the world. His message helped shape how Hinduism came to be understood outside of India. Vivekananda taught that if all is one, then serving others is the same as serving yourself. And finally, Ramana Maharshi, who died in 1950, shaped the way Advaita Vedanta is practiced today. Traditional Advaita was often blended with Hindu ritual, devotion to deities, and scriptural study, but Ramana stripped it all down to its essence, pure self-inquiry. His method was simple and direct. Just ask, who am I? And that question became the foundation of modern Advaita practice. Now, the whole meditation of who am I is incredibly powerful. It breaks down who you think you are using logic, stripping everything away until you discover who you really are, which is pure awareness. But once you get to that point, once you realize that you are your awareness, the next step is to understand that your awareness is not separate from other people's awareness. And this part requires more advanced meditation skills. Fundamentally, you have to learn how to place your consciousness outside your body. And that's possible. In my video about how to realize non-duality, we go in depth into these practices, so check it out if you're interested in that. So, Ramana Maharshi taught that people should pursue a very simple practice, and really, most of Advaita Vedanta's practice is simple. The tradition mostly rejects complex meditation techniques in favor of deep inquiry. And what does that look like? It's asking yourself questions meant to cut through ignorance, avidya, remember? So you contemplate sentences like Aham Brahmasmi, which means I am Brahman, or Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, which means all this is Brahman, or Neti Neti and Tat Vam Asi. Those are two very famous ones that I go over in detail in the How to Realize Non-Duality video. The point, though, is that Advaita Vedanta's methods are pretty stripped down. Some people do devotion practices or breath work like pranayama or focused meditation just to train the mind, but most of the practice is about inquiry. The goal is to reach jnana, which translates to knowledge, but not in the normal way we think about knowledge. Jnana is deep understanding, it's realization. It's not just believing something intellectually. You might believe you're Brahman after hearing the arguments I laid out today, but that's still not the same as knowing in your being. These meditations are meant to bring about that kind of realization. That said, even if you agree with Advaita Vedanta's view of reality, you don't have to follow its practices. You can walk the spiritual path in many ways. And honestly, the practices of other traditions might fit you better, depending on your personality and natural tendencies. You don't have to take the Advaita Vedanta practice together with the Advaita Vedanta philosophy. For example, you could follow Buddhist techniques. Dzogchen and Zen are both non-dual traditions, even though their philosophy differs from Advaita in some fascinating ways, which I'll definitely cover in a future video. But their methods aim for the same thing, direct realization that you are awareness itself. So they use techniques like the classic open awareness meditation, where you just observe your thoughts and sensations without doing anything. Then there are koans. These are paradoxical riddles that are meant to break your reasoning mind. You probably heard something like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? That's not actually a koan, but you get the idea. A real koan would say something like, a monk asked, does a tree falling in the forest make a sound? The master replied, do you hear it? So you're supposed to sit with that question, and if you really do with focus, you'll find that reason breaks down pretty quickly. So you can eliminate your thinking brain from the equation and watch what's behind it. Now, if you want actual koans, you need to look them up. The most famous ones are, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Another goes, does a dog have Buddha nature? The answer is mu. And a third, what was your original face before your parents were born? There are also sudden insight practices, like the kind of thing you'll find in Sam Harris's Waking Up app. You're looking at something and suddenly he snaps his fingers and you're supposed to look for the one who is looking. That kind of thing. Then there's Tantra. Tantra sees the world not as something to reject, but as something divine. What's cool about tantric practice is that it's not about asceticism or denial, it's more about embracing the world fully. Now, Tantra isn't always non-dual, some schools are dualistic, but honestly, you can go very far on the path using even dual tantric practices. Some non-dual tantric lines you might look into are Kashmiri Shaivism, also called Trika Shaivism, Srividya, which worships the goddess as Shakti, who is Brahman, and Vajrayana Buddhism from Tibet. These schools often focus on body and energy practices. Some people even refer to them as Eastern magic. We're talking chakra work, kundalini energy, tummo, where you control your body heat, mantra chanting, meditations on sacred geometry using yantras, visualizations, and mandala offerings. Honestly, you can walk a huge part of the path within dual traditions. If you're curious, look up Shakta Tantra, Vaishnava Tantra, or Shaiva Siddhanta, which is sometimes non-dual depending on the branch. And by the way, If you think non-duality is just an Eastern idea, think again. Europe has had strong non-dual traditions for centuries, and they've shaped a lot of what we now think of as Western spirituality. Take Neoplatonism, for instance. The idea of the One, a single, absolute, undivided reality, had a huge influence on Christian mysticism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and even modern occultism. Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart talked about a divine presence beyond all concepts, what he called the God beyond God. His work shaped contemplative Christianity and even modern movements like New Thought. Hermeticism teaches that the all is mind, this idea of a universal consciousness underlying everything. That doctrine became the foundation for magical systems like Thelema, the AA, that's Argentium Astrum, the builders of the Adytum, that's BOTA, various Rosicrucian orders, even chaos magic. All of these rely on the idea that consciousness shapes reality. And then there is Kabbalah, where Ein Sof, the formless infinite source, exists beyond all duality. Everything that exists is simply an emanation of that singular essence. Gnosticism had the same core idea. The monad is the ultimate infinite source. You still see this in esoteric Christianity, modern Gnostic revivals, and even in some psychedelic spiritual circles that seek direct experience of unity. And non-duality isn't just found in Eastern or European traditions, it's everywhere. Most African spiritual systems recognize a supreme, formless source behind all things. In the Yoruba tradition is Olodumare. In Voodoo is Bondie. In Bantu and Congo traditions, you hear Nzambi, Mwari, or Mulungu. These aren't separate gods, they're the fundamental energy of existence itself. You see the same thing across the Americas. In Tupi-Guarani, in Brazil, they speak of Nyanderubusu, the great creative principle that flows through all things. In Mexico, the Wixárika, Huichol, and the Mazatec use peyote or psilocybin to achieve visions of reality as a single interconnected force. The Nahua talk about Teotl, the sacred essence that permeates all of existence. The Kogi of Colombia speak of a Luna, the cosmic thought that holds the universe together. And in the Andes is Viracocha, the spirit behind all creation. All of these traditions hold a non-dual view of reality. My point is that the idea of non-duality as the fundamental reality is not just common, it's everywhere. So if you want to realize this, there are plenty of practices to pursue beyond Advaita Vedanta. Any of the traditions I just talked about will have lots of specific practices to advance you in the spiritual path. You can search among many Eastern and Western traditions for a set of practices that suit your own personality and disposition. Now, if you don't want to soar through Eastern systems and you're not looking to join a specific belief group, you should know that a big part of Western magic is actually theurgic, which means that the whole point is union with the divine. So you can find a lot of practices aimed directly at self-realization and you don't have to join anything at all. And different from many Eastern paths, where some teachings can be hard to find or are passed down only through specific lineages, a lot of magical practices are written down in books. If you want a starting point, you can look up Lon Milo Duquette or Donald Michael Craig for beginner ceremonial magic. You can also check out Franz Bardum's system of Hermetic initiation. His work lays out a very structured path and trains not just your magical abilities, but your thinking, your emotions, your habits, your whole self. So, I hope this gave you a clearer idea of what Advaita Vedanta, Brahman, and non-duality are. I hope that you also have a better understanding now of the context in which these terms are used. I love to hear your thoughts and experiences with any of this, so definitely let me know in the comments. You can also tell me what topics you'd like to see in future videos. And if you enjoy this kind of content, remember to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. Your support really helps me making videos like this one. I wish you all the best in this path, and I hope to see you in my next video.